A very happy morning, happy afternoon, happy evening based on what time you're watching this lecture. Friends, now we'll be focusing on your amendments for your November 2022 exams. Basically focusing on all the amendments in GST which came from your 1st of November 2021 till your 30th of April 2022. So when you talk about the amendments, our focus will be on all the amendments, whether by way of amendment in the section or rules or notification or circulars which came between 1st of November 2021 till your 30th of April 2022, which will be relevant for your November 2022 exams. Now you might wonder, what about the amendments which came before your 1st of November 2021? Obviously those amendments are already discussed when you're talking about your May 2022 exam. So we are not touching those amendments. And friends, we have given the amendments aligned with our main material, which is Study Revise Crack SRK. So the chapter sequence in the amendments in your Study Revise Crack material and what we are going to discuss will be in sync. So the first amendment, friends, has come in your levy chapter. So when you talk about your levy chapter, friends, the main definition there in your levy chapter is the definition of supply. Right, so when you talk about the charging section, it is section 9 of CGST Act 2017, which tells that the important process, that is taxable event, which should be there for attracting GST happens to be supply. So the taxable event is supply. Supply has been defined in section 7 of your CGST Act. So there's an amendment in section 7 of your CGST Act by way of adding a new clause, section 7 clause subsection 1 clause AA. Also correspondingly there is an amendment in para 7 of schedule 2. So whenever you read supply, friends, we have discussed that you have to read supply section 7 along with schedule 1, schedule 2, schedule 3. One of the schedule that is there is schedule 2, which talks about nature of supply, whether it is a supply of goods or whether it is a supply of service, whether the supply happens to be supply of goods or supply happens to be supply of service. So this amendment has impacted both section 7 as well as schedule 2. Now to give you a background, what happened was, when you talk about unincorporated association of persons and the body of individuals, there was a Supreme Court judgment which says, finally was in favor of assessee, telling that the unincorporated body and the members are one and the same. So the Supreme Court judgment came in favor of assessee, telling that when you talk about an unincorporated body, whether it is association of persons or body of individuals, there is an unincorporated body and the members, they are one and the same. If they are one and the same, you cannot supply to yourself, right? So if you are talking about your unincorporated body and their members, and suddenly if I tell that they happen to be the same, they happen to be one and the same person, if at all they are one and the same person, the transactions between them can never be called as supply. So it will not fit under the ambit of supply. So Supreme Court judgment in case of Calcutta Club Company, it finally said that no, they are one and the same. Therefore, there cannot be a supply between unincorporated body and the members. A classic example of unincorporated body can be your clubs, residential welfare associations, and various kind of other associations. But government wanted to overrule this Supreme Court judgment. So what they did, they said that okay, it cannot be supply, but we can make it as deemed supply. So your Supreme Court judgment said that it is not supply. Now amendment in section 7, which is section 7 subsection 1 clause AA, said that it is now deemed supply. It is now deemed supply. So whenever there is a transaction between unincorporated body and its members, whether the supply is by unincorporated body to members or whether it is by members to unincorporated body, it is now deemed supply. To effectively overrule the Supreme Court judgment, they brought in your section 7 subsection 1 clause AA to tell that now it is deemed supply. Now it is deemed supply. So effectively it was to overrule the Supreme Court judgment or Supreme Court ruling in case of Calcutta Club Company, How they did it? Look at the wordings that they have brought in. So they are telling that activities or transaction by a person other than individual. So when you're talking about by a person other than individual, basically the focus is on your unincorporated body. It might be association of persons or body of individuals to its members or constituents, or vice versa, whether it is unincorporated body to the members or members to the unincorporated bodies, whether it is by way of cash or deferred payment or any other valuable consideration, it happens to be deemed supply. It happens to be supply. So it is defining supply. So it is telling that whenever there is a transaction between unincorporated body and the members of the constituents, or vice versa, members to unincorporated body, whether the payment is by way of cash or deferred payment or any other valuable consideration, this is supply, deemed supply. Now there is an explanation attached to it, and see the beauty of the explanation. The explanation tells that for the purpose of this clause, which is your clause 7(1)AA, that is section 7(1)AA, it is hereby clarified that notwithstanding anything contained in any other law. So whether for your income tax purposes they may be treated as one person, forget about that. Notwithstanding anything, any judgment, decree or order of court, tribunal, authority. So forget even about the judgment, forget even about your Supreme Court judgments, right? The person and its members, that is the unincorporated body and the members, shall be deemed to be two separate persons. They shall not be treated as same person. They shall be deemed to be two separate persons, and any supply between them, it will be treated as supply from one person to another person. So that is the way government, rather parliament, overruled the Supreme Court pronouncement of the judgment. Now one might wonder that, okay, we are now very clear with section 7 clause, section 7 subsection 1 clause AA, that they are effectively overruling Supreme Court judgment, calling it as deemed supply. Supreme Court said that it is not supply, forget about it. Now it is telling that it is deemed supply because they will be treated as different persons. They will not be treated as same persons. They will be treated as different persons. Therefore it is now deemed supply. Now one might wonder that, okay, we are very clear with section 7 subsection 1 clause AA, but what about what is the amendment which is there in your para 7 of schedule 2? Now para 7 of schedule 2 earlier said that whenever you are talking about supply of goods by unincorporated association of body of persons to a member, if it is supply of goods by unincorporated body, whether by way of cash or deferred payment or any other valuable consideration, it will be treated as supply of goods. But this was causing confusion. Why this was causing confusion? The transaction between unincorporated body and the members, can that be of goods and can that be of services? If it is that of goods, it will be treated as supply of goods. If it is that of services, it will be treated as supply of services. Right? If that supply is that of goods between unincorporated body and members, then it will be treated as supply of goods. If the supply between unincorporated body and the members is that of services, then it will be treated as supply of services. Unnecessarily, this para 7 of schedule 2 was focusing only on goods, supply of goods portion. It was not focusing on supply of services. So this was creating a confusion. To avoid that confusion, they have removed or omitted para 7 of schedule 2 itself, because when there is supply of goods between unincorporated body and members, it will be treated as supply of goods. When there is supply of services between unincorporated body and its members, it will be treated as supply of services. So para 7 was no more warranted, therefore the same has been removed. So this was all about the amendment which was there in your supply definition, section 7 subsection 1 clause AA, read along with your schedule 2 para 7. Now friends, we are talking about your chapter which is named as taxable person including reverse charge mechanism. So you are talking about basically who is liable to pay GST, the person who is liable to pay GST. Now one might ask that what is the amendment in this chapter, whether there is any amendment in RCM. No friends. When you talk about this chapter, there is an important area called as electronic commerce operator, right? Section 9(5) of your CGST Act, read along with section 55 of your IGST Act. Right, so you're talking about section 95 of your CGST Act. There's a notification 17/2017 CT. Section 55 of your IGST Act, there's a notification there 14/2017 IT rate. So it is all about your rate notification here. Now friends, you're talking about what amendment exactly is that. So when you talk about your electronic commerce operator, basically section 95, we'll call it as section 95 of CGST Act. The same thing is copied in section 55 of IGST Act. Basically when you're talking about your section 95 and section 55 of CGST and IGST Act respectively, they are telling that it is neither the supplier who has to pay the tax nor the recipient who has to pay the tax. Normally what happens friends is either the supplier is required to pay the tax or the recipient is required to pay the tax. If supplier is required to pay the tax, then we call it as forward charge mechanism. So if at all I tell that supplier you have to pay GST, then we call it as forward charge mechanism. If recipient is liable to pay the tax, then we call it as reverse charge mechanism. But there is a scenario where neither supplier is liable to pay the tax nor recipient is liable to pay the tax. If the supply happens through electronic commerce operator, if the supply is via electronic commerce operator, in notified cases, not in all the cases, in notified cases, electronic commerce operator is liable to pay the tax. Electronic commerce operator is liable to pay the tax. So ECO will pay GST. Your electronic commerce operator will pay GST. So neither the supplier comes forward nor the recipient comes forward. It is the third person. For the transaction between supplier and recipient, ECO will pay GST. But this provision is only and only there for notified services. Notified services. Now when you look at the notified services are very limited. So first of all, there should be supply of services via ECO, that is through ECO, and the notified services are your passenger transportation services, your accommodation services, your housekeeping services, including carpentry work, all those works are also included. So not only housekeeping, all the associated services are covered there. So passenger transportation, accommodation and housekeeping services. Now friends, you're talking about a scenario where they have done two amendments. First, they have done one amendment with your passenger transportation services. They have amended this portion a bit. The second amendment that has come out is they have added the fourth category of services where you're talking about restaurant services. So what has happened in this section 95 of CGST Act read along with section 55 of IGST Act, the first thing that has happened is they have amended something with respect to passenger transportation services and they have added a fourth category where you're talking about supply of restaurant services via ECO. Now coming back to the first part. Now there already, when you talk about the notified services, passenger transportation services was already covered, but what was mentioned therein was supply of services by way of transportation of passengers by radio taxi, motor cab, maxi cab, motor cycle, omnibus or any other motor vehicle. So what have they done is they have added your omnibus and any other motor vehicle. So in the list of this, they have expanded the scope of section 95 rather. So earlier it was only radio taxi, motor cab, maxi cab and motorcycle. So you only had 4 cases: radio taxi, motor cab, maxi cab and motorcycle. Now they have added even via omnibus and any other motor vehicle. Now when you talk about definition of your maxi cab, motorcycle is there in your section 2 clause 22, section 2 clause 25 and section 2 clause 26. 7 of your Motor Vehicles Act 1988. So basically, first what have they done is they have corrected. Initially what was happening was they have said motorcycle, but the definition was not that of motorcycle. They talked about motorcycle, but the definition was of motor car. Now what have they done is they have corrected that for motorcycle you have to refer to section 2 clause 27. So motorcycle is also covered. So when you're talking about all your apps where you are riding via a two-wheeler, right? So you are talking about not only booking Ola app, Ola, now even you have Ola two-wheelers, right? So Ola two, you can book Ola two-wheeler and the two-wheeler will come and pick you up. So all these apps, including Rapido, which was one of the first apps to launch your transportation of passenger services via two-wheeler. So that was also doubtful scenario because the wordings are motorcycle, but the definition was pointing out towards motor cars. Now first thing that they have done is motorcycle, they have correctly said that definition of motorcycle is not there in section 2 clause 26, but there in section 2 clause 27 of your Motor Vehicles Act. So the moment you are booking a two-wheeler via Rapido, it is very clearly covered in your section 9.5. Now what have they done is, as they have added two more points, that is omnibus and any other motor vehicle. So they have said that for omnibus and any other motor vehicle, you have to refer to section 2 clause 28 for motor vehicle, section 2 clause 29 for omnibus. Omnibus definition is very clearly defined that omnibus means any motor vehicle construed or adapted to carry more than 6 persons excluding the driver. So you're talking about more than 6 persons means omnibus. They're talking about big buses also being covered here. So there was a doubtful scenario whether buses will be covered here, but now they have said that omnibus will be very much covered here. So it is any motor vehicle, not the normal bus, but which is having the capacity to carry more than 6 persons excluding the driver. Don't count the driver. So that is the definition of your omnibus. One might argue that even motor cab was talking about carrying more than 6 to 12 passengers. Yes, but that was cab. You are talking about now buses. So normal buses are not covered, but omnibuses are covered where they have the capacity to carry more than 6 passengers. So that is the definition of omnibus. So if at all through Eco I am booking a bus for say a trip of all the office members, so then that will be covered under section 9.5. Now what is the definition of motor vehicle? Motor vehicle or vehicle means any mechanically propelled vehicle adapted for using upon roads where the power of propulsion is either external or internal source. So they are telling that it is not only your normal vehicle, right? External source is not required, even it can be an internal source. Battery operated vehicles are also covered. So mechanically propelled vehicle is there, which is there on roads where the power of propulsion is either external or internal source. So your e-vehicles are also covered. It includes a chassis to which a body has not been attached. For this particular section 9.5, it is not relevant, but it is trying to tell that chassis, the outer body is covered without the exact assembling being done. So even the chassis, the main portion of the vehicle, even that is covered within the definition of motor vehicle. Not so important when you're seeing section 9.5, section 5.5, because when you're talking about passenger transportation services, it cannot happen on a chassis. Obviously, the entire vehicle should be ready. It will not include a vehicle which is running upon fixed rails or which is for a special type which is used only in a factory. So if at all it is going on a fixed rail, there is a particular channel through which that vehicle will go. So that motor vehicle we are not talking about, nor we are talking about any special vehicle which is used in factory or a particular premises, right? Or a vehicle which is having less than 4 wheels fitted with an engine capacity not exceeding 25 cubic centimeters. So 3 categories are not covered. First, if at all there is a motor vehicle which will run only on a fixed rail, so there is a particular track, it will run only on that track, so that is not covered. We are not talking about special type vehicle which will be working only in factories or any enclosed premises. No, that we are not talking about that. We are not talking about a vehicle which is having less than 4 wheels, which means 3 or less, and the engine capacity is not exceeding 25 cubic centimeters. So we are not talking about even that. Right? So 3 categories are removed. On a fixed rails, it might be in a premises or not, or in a fixed place, that is factory, special type vehicle or for a factory, or for an enclosed premises. That also we are not talking about. We are also not talking about a scenario where you are having a vehicle less than 4 wheels and whose engine capacity is less than 25 cubic centimeters. So this is the amendment that has been brought in your passenger transportation service. In a nutshell, what has happened is the scope of section 9.5 and 5.5 with respect to passenger transportation services has been enhanced, because they have said that now when you're talking about supply of services through eco of passenger transportation services, even in relation to omnibus or any other motor vehicles, is covered in section 9.5. right? So the scope of section 9.5 with respect to passenger transportation services has been increased. Now friends, as I said, there is one more point that has been added in your section 9.5. So one more point that has been added in your section 9.5. What is that particular point? You are talking about supply of restaurant services through eco. So you basically, the focus is on supply of restaurant services through eco, but other than a restaurant which is working in a premises, which means other than restaurant within a hotel where you go for staying, other than restaurant or eating joints located in specified premises. Now one might wonder what is meant by specified premises. Specified premises means a hotel where you go and stay. So specified premises means a premises which is providing hotel accommodation services, and it is having declared tariff value of any unit. Even a single room's declared tariff value, if it is above 7,500 per unit per day or equivalent, then we are not talking about this scenario. Friends, what are we trying to say? So supposing there is supply of restaurant service through your Zomato. Is it covered now in section 9.5? We will evaluate. Second, supply of restaurant services which is a part of hotel, again through say Swiggy. Now friends, understand that there is a small change in these two scenarios. If it is a pure restaurant, so one we are talking about pure restaurant, one we are talking about a restaurant which is there inside a hotel where there is stay facility as well. If it is pure restaurant, if it is supply of restaurant services through Zomato, understand that it is very clearly covered by section 9.5 or section 5.5, and who will pay GST is Zomato. Zomato will pay GST. But if at all it is supply of restaurant services which is part, and the restaurant is a part of a hotel, and that restaurant services is provided to say Swiggy, electronic commerce operator, then you have to ask a question. What question you need to ask? Whether there is any single room whose declared tariff value is more than 7,500 per room, that is per unit per day, or it is less than or equal to 7,500 per unit per day. So you have to ask a basic question that whether the declared tariff value is more than 7,500 per unit per day or less than or equal to 7,500 per unit per day. If it is less than or equal to 7,500, any single room. So when you are talking about, even if a single room's declared tariff value is more than 7,500 per unit per day, then it will not be covered by your section 9.5 of CGST Act or section 5.5 of your IGST Act. The tax would be paid by restaurant itself, that is the hotel itself, because restaurant and hotel, restaurant is part of that particular hotel. So in this particular scenario, you need to understand that in this scenario, Restaurant itself will pay tax under forward charge mechanism. So it is not covered under section 9(5) of CGST Act, section 5(5) of your IGST Act. But if the declared tariff value of all the rooms is less than or equal to 7,500 per unit per day, in that scenario it is covered in section 9(5) or section 5(5), section 9(5) of CGST Act, section 5(5) of IGST Act. And in this case, who will pay GST is the electronic commerce operator. Swiggy will. In the second example, it was Swiggy who will pay the GST. So this is a new inclusion in section 9(5) or section 5(5) of CGST Act, IGST Act respectively. Restaurant services through electronic commerce operator. So if at all there is a supply of restaurant services through Zomato and it is a pure restaurant, Zomato will pay GST. But if it is supply of restaurant services which is part of a hotel through Swiggy, you need to ask us one question: whether the declared tariff value of any single unit or room is more than 7,500 per unit per day, then it is not covered in section 9(5), section 5(5). Restaurant will pay GST and a forward charge mechanism. But if I tell that no, declared tariff value of all the rooms, now it is not any, all the rooms is less than or equal to 7,500 per unit per day. It is all, you have checked all the rooms and you found that declared tariff value is less than or equal to 7,500 per unit per day, then friends, it is covered in section 9(5), section 5(5) of CGST Act, IGST respectively. Eco will pay GST, Swiggy will pay GST. So that is the basic understanding of your new entry in section 9(5) of CGST Act read along with section 5(5) of IGST Act. Now when this new entry came in, there were a lot of doubts which were raised, and these doubts have been clarified as well. Now what were the doubts that were raised? The restaurant services, the background is restaurant services was notified under section 9(5) of CGST Act. Accordingly, when restaurant services is supplied through Eco will pay the tax. So that was the basic understanding of your section 9(5) of CGST Act. Now, if at all Eco will pay tax, whether Eco is required to collect TCS as per section 52. Understand that when you see section 52, it clearly tells that if at all Eco itself is paying GST as per section 9(5), TCS will not come. So there will be no longer TCS. So TCS will not be there now. Why? Section 52 is very, very clear in its understanding. Section 52 very clearly tells that this TCS will be there for those cases which are not notified in section 9(5). As now restaurant services has been notified under section 9(5), Eco, that is the intermediaries like Zomato or Swiggy or any such electronic commerce operator will no longer collect TCS because they themselves are paying taxes. Now the restaurants are not paying taxes, they themselves are paying taxes. The question of TCS will not be there. That was the first clarification. Now the next clarification which was there was whether the Eco have to take mandatory separate registration with respect to restaurant services, even though they are already registered to pay GST on their own account, which means the Eco initially were paying GST on their commission. Now suddenly they had said that you don't pay GST on the commission, you pay GST on the entire restaurant amount. Supposing you are placing an order through, so you are talking about you are placing an order against a restaurant where the order is placed via Swiggy. So I am placing an order, I am hungry, I am taking lectures continuously, so I am hungry. So what I do? I open my phone and I order through Swiggy that I need something. Now what was happening earlier? On restaurant portion, whatever was the bill on restaurant portion, restaurant service, the person who was paying tax was restaurant. Forward charge mechanism. Swiggy was paying tax on its commission, which it was getting from that restaurant. Again forward charge mechanism. To put in numbers, supposing I am paying 500 rupees to a particular restaurant. On 500 rupees, restaurant was paying GST on under forward charge mechanism, and supposing commission of Swiggy was 50 rupees. Swiggy was paying GST on 50 rupees forward charge mechanism. Rather, there were two contracts. If I want to split the contracts, you will find that there were two contracts. One was by restaurant to myself, and the other was by Swiggy to restaurant. So there were two contracts. Restaurant was liable to pay GST on forward charge mechanism 500 rupees, and Swiggy was liable to pay GST on its commission 50 rupees forward charge mechanism. Obviously, whatever output tax Swiggy was paying, restaurant was able to take input tax credit. So that you need to understand. Right, so restaurant was paying GST on restaurant services, Swiggy was paying GST on its commission. Now suddenly what is happening is, government is telling that restaurant, you don't come into picture. Swiggy, you will be caught, but Swiggy, now you are required to pay GST on entire 500 rupees. Swiggy, you will be required to pay GST on entire 500 rupees. Now this technically is neither forward charge mechanism nor reverse charge mechanism. Actually, this particular service of 500 is of restaurant, but who is required to pay GST? Swiggy is required to pay GST. This 500 rupees actually belongs to restaurant, out of which it will give commission to Swiggy. But this is the supply of restaurant, but someone else, Swiggy, is required to pay GST on entire 500 rupees. So when this amendment came, it changed this entire situation. It said that restaurant, you forget about paying GST on 500 rupees. Swiggy, now you no more pay GST on 50 rupees. You pay GST, but on entire 500 rupees. On entire 500 rupees. So Swiggy was already registered for paying GST on its commission 50. Now whether it has to take new registration? The answer is no. Where Swiggy is already registered for paying GST on its commission, now it is asked to pay GST on the entire restaurant service. It is not required to take new registration. It is already registered, so there is no need for new registration. Now whether GST will be there when the services are made by unregistered business entities. What if I tell that the restaurant was unregistered? Understand that whether the restaurant is registered restaurant or unregistered restaurant, ECO has to pay GST. So whether the restaurant happens to be registered or unregistered, ECO will be required to pay GST. So now earlier there would have been scenario where Swiggy is helping even an unregistered restaurant and also helping registered restaurant. Swiggy will always pay GST on its commission, but an unregistered restaurant will not pay GST, and registered restaurant will pay GST on restaurant services. Now what is the clarification? These are all basic clarifications. What if the supplier, that is the restaurant, is unregistered? Whether still GST will be payable by ECO? So now the clarification comes, and it is very pretty clear whether the restaurant is registered restaurant or unregistered restaurant. Now the liability is not at all on restaurant, the liability is on ECO. So ECO has to pay GST on restaurant services. Forget about whether the restaurant is registered or unregistered. That is the next clarification which is there. The next clarification, which is again a very important point, whose aggregate turnover it is. Understand that ECO is paying GST on behalf of restaurant. Actually 500 rupees was restaurant service by restaurant, but ECO is taking the efforts of paying GST on behalf of restaurant. Whether this 500 rupees in our example will be included in the turnover of ECO, or it will be still remaining the turnover only of the hotel. So now what is clarified is this aggregate turnover, whether for threshold calculation or for any other purposes, person who is providing the restaurant services through ECO, it will be included in his aggregate turnover. I'll take this example again. Finally, what is happening is Swiggy is required to pay GST on entire 500 rupees, which is neither RCM nor FCM. But understand that this 500 rupees is not aggregate turnover of Swiggy. It cannot be called as it is aggregate turnover of Swiggy. It is aggregate turnover of that restaurant only. See, someone else, Swiggy is telling that, okay, I am more organized, I will pay GST on your behalf. You can tell that Swiggy is paying GST on 500 rupees on behalf of the restaurant. But whether that will become the aggregate turnover of Swiggy? No. So, though Swiggy is paying GST on 500 rupees on behalf of restaurant, it won't be included in aggregate turnover of Swiggy, it will be included only in aggregate turnover of restaurant. That is mere clarification. It is just like a RCM clarification. Supposing I am the supplier, you are the recipient. You are required to pay GST under RCM. Whether the supply that I am making to you, whether it will be included in your turnover? No. Though I am not paying tax as a supplier and you are paying tax as a recipient under RCM, turnover belongs to me. Just like that, in this case, there was supply by restaurant via Swiggy, where restaurant should have paid GST, but now Swiggy is paying GST on restaurant's behalf. Section 9.5, Section 5.5 of CGST Act, IGST Act respectively. Now, one thing you have to very clearly understand that it still remains the turnover of the restaurant, not the turnover of Swiggy. So that is the clarification that is given. Very logical clarifications. Now the next question, which is again, all the points are very simple, quite simple points. Whether the services on which ECO is paying GST will be reported as RCM in your GST 3B? Again the answer is no. Understand that I said that when Swiggy is paying GST on behalf of restaurant, it is neither FCM nor RCM. So it won't be reported as reverse charge mechanism. Rather 3B is now built in a way where you have a separate column. Earlier 3B did not have a separate column for ECO paying GST under section 9.5. Now you have a separate column where ECO is paying GST under section 9.5. Lot of doubts were there where to report this section 9.5 turnover. Now 3B is been brought up in such a way that you can report your section 9.5 category. Section 9.5 is neither FCM nor RCM. Neither the supply paying tax nor the recipient who is paying tax. So now what is happening is a third person will pay GST, which is electronic commerce operator, and it will not be reported as reverse charge mechanism. So this has been clarified. Now the next question that came up is whether ECO is liable to reverse proportionate input tax credit for the reason that it is not admissible, it cannot take the credit for restaurant services, whether there is any ITC implication. What is the implication of ITC when you talk about electronic commerce operator? Because it is paying GST on behalf of restaurant. So whether it will change anything on its input tax credit. So if you read this entire clarification, it tells that there is no change in input tax credit. There is no change in input tax credit. Again, if I were to explain via this example, earlier Swiggy was required to pay GST on its commission 50 rupees. Now Swiggy is required to pay GST on the entire restaurant services, which is not its supply, it is restaurant supply on 500 rupees. So it is paying more GST. Though technically Swiggy's outward supply is only 50, but now it is not paying GST on 50, it is paying on the entire 500 rupees. So they have clarified that there will be no change in input tax credit. Whatever input tax credit earlier Swiggy was taking, even now it can take. Even now it can take. So this is very simple calculation, very simple understanding, though explained in a very lengthy manner. The net crux is earlier Swiggy or Zomato were paying GST on their supply. Now they are paying GST on someone else's supply. Their input tax credit will still remain intact. They were paying earlier GST on the lesser amount. Now they are paying GST on the higher amount. They will have their own input tax credit. But the problem is the next clarification, where we are not into agreement with the next clarification. Can ECO utilize that input tax credit for your restaurant services? Now this clarification is a bit disturbing. Actually, when you get input tax credit, you can use it for any outward supply. Now the clarification tells that ECO can take input tax credit, but that input tax credit cannot be used for paying GST under section 9.5. it can be used for paying GST under FCM. So this is a bit disturbing point. So initially issue number 6 or clarification number 6 is quite logical, and it tells that ECO can avail ITC. Can it utilize ITC? It tells that it can utilize ITC, but it cannot utilize ITC for paying GST under section 9(5), which in our understanding is totally incorrect. And in our understanding, ECO can take the credit that it was taking, because earlier it was paying GST on 50 rupees its supply, now it is paying GST on 500 rupees someone else supply. So its input tax credit will remain intact. It can use input tax credit for that output tax on 500 rupees, but circular tells that it cannot use input tax credit for paying a GST under section 9(5). It can use input tax credit for paying GST under FCM. So this we are not into agreement, but nevertheless this is a circular. This is not per se law, it is only a circular clarification given by CBIC. So we have given our author's note as well. Now the next question: would supply of goods or services other than restaurant services through ECO will be taxed at 5% without ITC, which is the rate for restaurant services? Understand that if I am supplying services through ECO, only restaurant supply services through ECO is covered under section 9(5). Other supplies are not covered under 9(5). Other supplies will liability to pay GST on other supplies will be that on supplier, not on ECO, and the rate will be normal rates. Understand that you are talking about a particular scenario where you are supplying through electronic commerce operator, through your electronic commerce operator. Multiple supplies are there. What they are telling that there are two supplies, one is restaurant and one is, say, other supplies. Understand that only on restaurant portion ECO will pay GST under section 9(5). On other supplies, supplier has to pay GST under forward charge mechanism. ECO will collect TCS. Right. So this clarification is again very clear clarification that ECO will pay GST under section 9(5) only for restaurant services. For other services through ECO, it is supplier who has to pay GST under FCM at the applicable rates, and ECO not at the rate of restaurant, and ECO will start collecting TCS. And the next clarification is continuation. It tells that it is advisable that ECO gives two invoices. For if it is given to the same customer, it is advisable that there are two separate invoices, because for the first case ECO is paying GST under section 9(5), and for the second case, supplier has to pay GST under FCM and ECO will collect TCS. So the next clarification is a continuation where it tells that invoices, if at all there are two supplies made via ECO, one is restaurant and one is other thing, better it is advisable that you give two separate invoices. So it is it will be given in this way. It is advisable that ECO raises two separate invoices. Right. Now the previous point is what will happen when you are talking about invoice in respect of restaurant services by ECO. Understand that for restaurant portion ECO will raise the invoice. For other supplies it is supplier who has to give the invoice. ECO will not give invoice. ECO will give invoice to the supplier, not to the customer. So again they are trying to, if you take this example clarifies everything. For restaurant services ECO is required to pay GST, so ECO will give invoice. For other suppliers, supplier is required to pay GST and under FCM, so the supplier will give invoice, and that is the reason it is advisable to give two separate invoices. And for other supplies, even TCS, if at all it is applicable, that will come. For your restaurant services, your TCS won't come. So that you need to understand. So that is all about the last three set of clarification discussed all together.